Welcome to another edition of the Afternoon Constitutional. Thank you for letting us be of service to you each and every afternoon at 3, where we sit down and we talk to some of the folks who are making it all happen and making sense of it all as well. And we're going to do a couple of different things today. We're going to hit on the story that we broke for you through our friends at the Media Research Center last week, and the weaponization of government again to create censorship to protect you from words that they don't want you to hear, which is really at the core of all censorship. What it is protecting you from words that you don't want to hear. And there are countries all over the world that are constituted in a different way than ours. Ours is not constituted in a way that protects you from anything. It allows for you to protect yourself in any way you see fit to arm yourself. A reminder to my friends in the gun control world, the word gun never appears anywhere in the Bill of Rights, but why get muddied up in those discussions? The idea that the government is going to protect you leads us to the nanny state. The nanny state is, as all good nannies are, there to protect the youngins, the young impressionable minds, from things they're not supposed to hear, see, say, do, or put in their mouths. So they've ramped up. Now we have the report from the Department of Homeland Security through the Media Research Center regarding all of the monies that have been given, grants to organizations to go after conservative organizations. And a fellow who has been, how should I put this, at the point of this spear for a very, very long time. Why Michael Bloomberg actually hired a bunch of lawyers to go pretend to be members of the attorneys general offices of many states to go after not Steve Milloy and the people at Junk Science, but the people who fund Steve Milloy. See if that sounds familiar at all. And he joins us now from the offices of Junk Science. Steve, it's so good to see you again. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, Joe, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I wish it was under better circumstances. We keep finding, and every time we out some of this nonsense, some of these shenanigans, we find newer, bigger ones. It's almost as if every time we catch them doing something unconstitutional, somebody in Washington says, "Hey, hold my beer. You ain't seen nothing yet." Steve, and in the climate reality world that you live in, you face this. I remember stories from members, I think you've told me some, and some of the other members of the Trump EPA landing team have told me stories about how you guys were treated when you arrived at the Environmental Protection Agency in 2018 and 2017. And it really was stunning to see that. But then to watch them go after, not you, they don't want to go after you. They want to go after the businesses that might sponsor you or the nonprofits that might fund you. It's really sort of backroom. But you and folks like our old friend Chris Horner have been, facing this for a very long time. There's just other groups that are feeling kind of new to the dance. So catch us up on where we are, Censorship 2023.
Yeah. Well, and so just so people know, the fossil fuel industry doesn't support people like me and Chris Horner. They're on the other side.
Right.
Okay? The Exxon Mobils of the world, they're funding the other side.
They're saying, "Oh, punish me.
Like,
I'll write my regulations. Please help me."
yeah, that's the irony. I mean, we get accused of doing what the other side is doing, right? It's always the projection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, look, we're always a couple steps behind because these environmental activist groups, they're not these soft and touchy-feely green groups that are just after trees and for trees and critters and things like that. These are multi-billion-dollar, multinational organizations that have huge staff. I mean, there's like a handful of people that do what I do, just a handful. And I'm talking, maybe less than 24.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably stretching it. That really do this sort of full time. On the other side, they have organizations that have hundreds, if not thousands, of members. They have billions of dollars behind them. They're always thinking. They're everywhere. They own every institution. They own all the schools. They own the Democrat Party, and they have a lot of influence even on Republicans. That's why we have to continually fight this stuff, because we can't even really draw it to a political stalemate because there's still Republicans that
Hmm.
are influenced by everything on the left. So it's quite a battle, and we're always slightly behind.
Well, and one of the things, and I saw this from last week, the EPA, no air in EPA, Gina McCarthy said to Congress, and I quote, the climate carbon regulations plan, quote, really is an investment opportunity. It is not about pollution control.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the
So
EPA chief saying all of this is not, and that's where I think all this money comes from. Is it's the seed money from these climate venture capitalists? Steve, am I
yeah.
wrong?
Well, it's from billionaires like George Soros and Michael Bloomberg and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. I mean, these people are incredibly well funded, and just her language, the whole this is an investment. No, it's not. People are trying to hijack our government, hijack our standard of living, hijack control over our lives. It's not an investment in anything. And they use this they polish up the language to make it sound like, oh yeah, this is free market. Is there such a thing as free market totalitarianism? Because that's what at best what it is.
Well, maybe that's what they're trying to invent is that we you broke it, you paid for it. So, Steve, what do we do? How do we continue to fight back against this? Because more and more it seems like the president, the administration, all of the overlords of wokeism, woke climate, woke social, they're all trying to protect us from words we're not supposed to hear. La la
Yeah.
la 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 la.
Well,
How do we keep pushing back?
so there's a lot of, we could just talk generally about what needs to be done, but something that could be done right now. The House passed this debt ceiling bill, and in that debt ceiling bill was the rollback of all the unspent Inflation Reduction Act money going for wind turbines and solar panels
Hmm.
and EVs, all this green nonsense. And I thought that Kevin McCarthy was going to hold the line and roll that stuff back because that's what's in the House bill. Okay, that's something that could be done right now. Republicans could roll back that spending. It's not necessary. It's not going to make the weather or the climate or the environment or anything any better. It's just a waste of money. And it's wasted like $1.2 trillion.
Hmm.
Republicans could roll that back, or at least roll back some of it, and
Hmm.
make some progress. But of course, Kevin McCarthy's afraid to do that.
Well, and I think a lot of it is fear because these folks want the free media that comes from being seen saving the baby harp seals or whatever it may be that they're pretending they're saving, Steve, and they don't get it. And what makes me sad is that this really is Charlie Brown and Lucy over and over again. Republicans go along with the green agenda. They go along, they capitulate with the climate cult, and then they still get pilloried for it. When are they going to learn that stop running up for the football? It's not going to be there when you
Well,
kick it.
yeah. So this is the thing. On the environment, Republicans they always cave in on it. It's this hugely important issue. I mean, the left is using global warming to capture our society and control everything about us, to cut our standard of living, reduce our. It's the most important thing, but I'll be damned if you can find a Republican politician that knows the first thing about it. I mean, there's precious few,
Hmm.
and then you have people like Kevin McCarthy, who's one of his best friends is Frank Luntz, who
Right.
is this Democrat pretending to be a Republican pollster who's on board with the Green Agenda, whispering in Kevin's ear, and
This
Kevin's already
polls
in
well.
California, which is a problem.
Yeah.
No, everybody cares about the environment on the right, but nobody wants to learn anything about it. And so it's very frustrating to see what Republicans are doing. And I do the best I can, and I know that the other people that do what I do, try to educate as good as you can. But they just refuse to learn. So they're afraid of the issue, and they just want to run away and talk about things that they do understand.
Well, and look, let's go back into how they do this because they hide in these government offices. They hire lawyers for your attorneys general. Then they hire lawyers to go work with congressional staff members and help them craft policy.
Right.
And then we see this DHS grant list that includes the Republican Party. Now I see one of the presidential candidates, Ramaswamy, has been censored for his tweets. I thought Twitter was supposed to be a safe haven for that. I mean, some of these things where we're targeting political opponents for no other better reason than they have a different answer to the same question that we do. It's third world country stuff, Steve.
Yeah, yeah. There's no question. I mean, the other side does not want to debate. And if you say something that is counter to the narrative, like Vivek Ramaswamy did the other day on LinkedIn and had his account at least temporarily canceled,
Scary.
and people have been kicked off Twitter. I mean, I've
Hmm.
been threatened on LinkedIn. I somehow survived Twitter. Now Twitter is owned by Elon Musk, and it's really sort of the Wild West again. And you
We
can
hope.
say what you want to say, which is great. It's all about freedom. I wanted to say something you mentioned, about the left hiring attorneys to help out state governments and attorneys general. That is the work of Chris Horner, who has done great work exposing how Michael Bloomberg is actually hiring lawyers to help state attorneys general and probably also Hill staff,
Hmm.
Democrat Hill staff, to develop crazy strategies and legislation on the climate. We don't have anything like that on the right. I mean,
Right.
really, we just have people like me and Chris and a handful of others. And in some ways, we've done extraordinary work because all the polls show that climate is not really an electoral issue. The New York Times poll, 1%
Yeah.
of voters prioritize climate, so that's a win for me.
Well, and when you look at it, the marshaled herd of these people on that side, and the few just saying the truth,
Yeah,
and we're actually beyond, I believe, equilibrium. I think more people realize that this is BS, especially
yeah,
when the simplest thing, when you point out to somebody that India and China are the two worst polluters on the planet and they're not held accountable for this, then people start to have the lights go off in their head. But if we're not allowed to speak, if we're not allowed to question, your website is called Junk Science, but I mean, isn't that really truly junk science when people aren't allowed to do inquiry into these things?
well, yeah. I mean, look, that's the central. That's the core of the scientific method: being able to ask questions and get answers and do research and have debate. I mean, that's what science is all about. But the other side is not interested in that. They know what they want. They want to control us, and so they are trying to use climate to do that. Rest assured that if they ever did get control of us, they would be using fossil fuels because you cannot have a society that's not run on
Mhm.
fossil fuels. Everything. This is not about there's no unicorn energy out there. Okay, fossil fuels are the only thing that works. Nuclear power can work, but of course, Greens don't want that either,
Right.
right?
They want
Now,
us all to use
overlaying,
electricity, but not nuclear electricity.
Joe, overlaying this whole thing is look, we've had almost 9 years now since mid 2014. 9 years, no global warming. Okay, since 2014, we have the atmosphere has had 23% more CO2 added to it, and still no global warming. And nobody is talking about that.
Wow.
There's more warming coming, but it's because we're going to have an El Nino. And El Nino has nothing to do with emissions.
Hmm.
El Nino is this mysterious warming in the Pacific, probably underwater volcanoes, periodically warms the atmosphere and changes global weather. And that's been happening since 1980. And so the slight warming we've seen over the past 40 years has been El Ninos, not
Hmm.
emissions. But we're not allowed to talk about that anywhere. I was on Israeli television yesterday. I got censored.
It
I got
really.
censored for saying that. Yeah,
But you
it's
see, that's
crazy.
the. But all these king's horses and all these king's men. Steve Milloy on with is
Yeah,
from Junk Science, aren't going to change the climate appreciably at all. It is, however, going to make several people extremely wealthy.
yeah.
And yet these are the politicians that tell us, Steve, that they're the ones who are going to go after, and no one making under $400,000 is going to whatever they're not going to have to do because they're not rich guys, and I'm going to go after those rich guys, and it's all BS because they're just making a whole new batch of rich people.
That's right. They're just transferring wealth, to politically favored interests. And even if you don't believe what I'm saying for some reason about emissions, the math is pretty simple. If you believe that emissions are driving climate, well, the United States is only about 10% of emissions. So the United States could shut down today and forever, and we would all be dead.
Hmm.
But it would not make it. 90% of emissions would still happen. So what would change? Nothing.
It's
The whole thing. There's none of it makes any sense. None of it.
Well, when you look then at this deal, and you talked about all the green agenda stuff that got peeled out of this, and we're going to spend some time with David Williams from the Taxpayer Protection Alliance in the second part of the program, kind of diving into the nitty gritties of what's in this debt ceiling deal. But does this debt ceiling deal run in the peril of having all the AOC, Ilhan Omar, Green New Deal types walking off just as much as the Chip Roy, Bob Good, Jimmy Massey types?
It may. I mean, we're going to have to see how that shakes out. I think what Democrats are banking on. I mean, there are some Democrats that are like New York Times this morning says, "Wow, we hope Congress passes this deal as soon as possible because they know the Republicans got almost nothing. We're just going to be going off spending money forever." AOC, if they somehow throw a hand grenade in the whole thing, they'll just blame Republicans and say Republicans couldn't make it happen, and their friends on Wall Street will help cause chaos, and Republicans will get the blame because Republicans are lame.
Yeah.
When it comes to hand-to-hand combat.
Well, and then when President Trump shows up and puts guys like you in the EPA, everyone loses their collective bowel control.
Well, I think you can say what you want about President Trump. He doesn't have good personnel choices, and there's all sorts of other issues. But the guy knew how to fight.
Well, no. I'm going to argue that. I'm going to argue that point for a second. Not that's bad host etiquette. I'm not arguing with you per se, but the narrative that President Trump made bad personnel choices. I look at guys like you and Steve Moore and Chris Horner. At the start, Donald Trump had really good personnel choices.
But there were people like Christopher Wray. So.
Well, no, but that came later. See, my point is at the onset in January, February, March, until the FBI got to General Flynn, and all of a sudden Donald Trump said, maybe I need a pro in here, and he turned to Reince Priebus of all people, and then we're surprised. Oh my goodness, Reince Priebus turned on the president. No, Steve, tell me it's not so.
So the point is that Trump, like no other Republican. I mean, maybe DeSantis can do it too, but Trump is a fighter, and we need someone who's going to get in there and fight. And Trump would fight on this, I think.
Yeah.
He wouldn't just roll over it. There's going to be ugliness ahead at some point. We either close the government now and shut down the government now and have a fight about it, or we do it later. It's going to happen at some point. There's no easy way out of all the government spending, right? There's no easy way out of all the climate idiocy.
Well, and that's what it is it's this cash transfer and this massive venture capital firm known as the U.S. government. I mean, I look at our state and local governments are all spending 20% of their budgets are federal pass-throughs, and then not even beginning to talk about the unfunded mandates. But that's where I'm seeing this collapse is going to get. I mean, we're going to make France in the 19th century look civilized when all these people who have counted on all this money. If we don't start 12-stepping our way away from this, it's going to be real ugly when people wake up and their grant program is gone away and they have no way to pay for the BMW or their unlimited cell phone minutes.
No, that's absolutely correct. We are just making ourselves more and more dependent on government. And the government at the same time is not managing its finances to be able to support all the people. And you got to wonder, well, maybe all this spending is just really just a voter turnout thing, and we're going to make everybody dependent on the government, and the voters are always going to vote for the government, and it's going to be impossible and when the government goes bankrupt, well, that's good too, because when out of periods of chaos comes even more government control.
Well, so you go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, so I'm just whoever wins in 2024, whoever's going to be the Republican nominee, they got to be a fighter. And, it's Trump. Maybe it's DeSantis. I don't know. Anybody else is, equipped to fight.
It has to happen, and I've seen it even on a local level. January 21st, 2017, I told my radio show audience, I said, beware, all these things they're doing to Donald Trump will come rest on your shoulders if you get in the way. You've faced it, Steve. You've faced it. Other folks have faced it. But now we're getting down to local levels where people who are just looking to be registrars of elections are having their name dragged in through the mud. Guys who protest on street corners are having their names dragged through mud just to make them sit down and shut up. And it's amazing to me. It's beyond even cancel culture. Sounds like something that was an '80s pop band with mohawks. This is really dark Orwellian stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I'm not trying to beat the drum for Trump or any candidate. I'm just saying we need a fighter. We
Yeah.
need someone who's going to push back and recognize that whoever the Republican nominee is in 2022 or 2024, I'm sorry, they're going to come after him with with both all barrels blazing, right? And
Absolutely.
it doesn't really matter who it is. It could be DeSantis. It could be someone as nice as Tim Scott.
Hmm.
Okay.
Well,
I
look at
mean,
what they've done to
Tim
him.
Scott,
I mean, he's a white supremacist.
he's a white supremacist,
Oh my
right?
God.
You can't win, right? You can't win.
So,
So,
so well, let me ask you this, and I'm going to save your and my 501c cookies here. The C in 501c stands for cookies. What about a guy like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has obviously seen behind the curtains on some things, and he seems like he's less bought into the science's settled crowd. And I haven't
yeah.
read a lot of his stuff. I know that he tends to talk the talking points regarding climate change from the Democrat playbook. But is he a guy, and I don't know, fighter, but he certainly doesn't seem to care that much whether people say nice things about him. And he's already polling at 20%.
Yeah, well, so he has made a comeback of sorts because he was on the right side during COVID, and
Hmm.
there's something to be said for that. On the other hand, he was on the right side of COVID because he had been a crackpot for 20 years before that. He had opposed all vaccines, the measles, mumps, rubella shot that all children get, and because of people like him and Jenny McCarthy and other anti-vaccine activists, there have been eruptions of measles, something causing deaths. Yeah, the COVID vaccine was bad. That was bad. He was right about that, but he was right about it because he's a broken clock. And from my view, he is just another left winger. Um, if he was president instead of Joe Biden, he'd be doing the same stuff. He's as green as AOC. I've got him on tape saying that he would put people like me in jail.
Hmm.
Well, that's kind of crazy to
Well,
me.
considering it's people like you and me that have actually given him his 20%, gravitas right now in the Democratic
Yeah,
poll.
I mean, he got a lot of credibility because Tucker Carlson had him on TV, and once again, I applaud him for his stance on COVID, but I recognize that that's where it stands. After that, he's just a Democrat.
So is there saving? And I'm going to borrow from the Marjorie Taylor Greene national divorce thing, because I think, and I truly believe this, and I'm not picking up because I think of the media parsed words out of what she said. The way the country was supposed to be run, Steve Milloy is on with us from Junk Science. The way the country was supposed to be constituted is the federal government was created by the several states, and the several states had their own way of doing things as long as it didn't violate the civil rights of
Right.
any of its citizens. I don't have a problem with the federal government collapsing into this kind of little white dwarf, and the states having to pick up all their own pieces and still create the federal government in that system that we had up until the end of the Civil War, Steve. That's where I feel like a conservative state can run its business in a conservative way, like a Texas, or maybe, knock wood, we keep going this way, Virginia, or a liberal state can run its business another way. But at the end of the day, they're all going to be liable to contribute the same kitty into the federal spending. What do you think about that?
Well, I am all for the United States the way the founding fathers had originally designed it, with strong states' rights. I think the senators were supposed to represent the states, and the House of Representatives is supposed to represent the people. And we have let progressives pervert all that. We let the Civil War destroy that.
Hmm.
And I think that is what we need to get back to, where the states are sovereign entities. Federal government manages, interstate issues. That's fine, but states, by and large, should be, all government. The best government is local government, because it's attached to the people that are being governed. So I'm all
Hmm.
for that, but I don't know how we get there.
Well, and that's what. But my point is, as we centralize medicine, as we centralize science, and Eisenhower warned us about the
Yes,
scientific industrial complex as much as he warned us about the military industrial complex. We see, science being driven by government. We see deals like, to borrow from Bobby Kennedy, the deal that the drug companies have never lived up to, which is showing Congress their
there you
vaccine injuries,
go. Yeah.
ever since 1984. I mean, again, if these are things, these are real things that have happened. But if we break up all of this centralization, I think we get back to a place where medicine can be done by doctors in your house and in your neighborhood, and science
Yeah.
can be done by the research labs in your community and that kind of thing.
I'm all for that. I mean, there is nothing good that comes out of big government. I mean, the bigger the government, the more corrupt it is. People have the most control over the government when it's local. So
Hmm.
things should be as localized as possible. In my area, the environment,
Yeah.
states should be doing virtually all environmental protection. Now, we don't really need a federal EPA. I mean, there are the occasional interstate issue or international issue the EPA can be useful, but generally speaking, it should be up to the states. 1970, when the EPA was formed, most states did not have departments of environmental protection, or their
Right.
own state EPAs, but now everybody does.
Well, and look
And
at wasn't
so,
there just a Supreme Court ruling 9-0? It was a unanimous ruling in favor of property rights and wetlands protections. And this was almost a decade in the coming, isn't it, Steve?
longer than that, these poor people bought their land in 2004, the Sacketts in Idaho, and they first got into litigation with EPA in 2007, and it's not over yet. I mean, they've had now two 9-0 Supreme Court decisions, and they still have to go back to court to fight EPA.
Oh
Now,
God.
the court may be more inclined this time to give them victory, but I mean, how many 9-0 Supreme Court decisions do you have to win
Mhm.
before you can build a house on a lake? I mean, it's crazy.
Well, but that's, how many lawyers do you have to pay is really
Right.
the
Who
big
can
question.
afford that?
Yeah.
You know,
But
and the thing is that EPA knows that no one can afford to litigate. I mean, this is the whole problem with the federal government. It's so huge, got endless deep pockets.
mhm,
It doesn't have to make any cost, decisions. The way they persecuted the January 6 people, they just have an open checkbook
right.
to go after whoever they want, and who can afford it. I mean, you have to surrender
Yeah.
because nobody can afford to fight.
Well, and that becomes the process, becomes the punishment, and we've seen that for years. So, and then you add to that the left wing is getting help from outside with the process being the punishment. Steve, I mean, it really is a daunting battle. But as I've said to our friend Seton Motley before, because he's very defeatist about it, he goes, "We're done." I'm like, "Yeah, but we still win half the time, right, Steve?"
Well, yeah, I'm not going to say we're done. You never know what's going to happen, and it's we've got to keep fighting for our children. I have a child, and I'm going to
Hmm.
keep fighting.
Amen.
And everybody's got to do that. I and we've got to win, and I think we can win, but we just need to have political leaders that have the will to fight. And a lot of them are just, in my fraternity, we used to call them lunch meat. They just sit there, and it's really unfortunate. Everyone on the left, they know what the agenda
Oh,
is, and even if they're not very smart, they always know to vote for their side,
yeah.
right?
Yep.
Republicans, hey, you gotta, it's like herding cats. I mean, it's very hard to get everybody on board. We're going to have a fight now with, I think, this debt ceiling bill.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
it's going to be a test of Kevin McCarthy's leadership. Um, we're just going to we just have to keep fighting, I guess.
Well, Steve, I do appreciate it. We're going to dig into the debt ceiling next with David Williams from the Taxpayer Protection Alliance, but I appreciate everything you do. Junkscience.com is the website. I appreciate it very much, sir. You have a wonderful afternoon.
All right, Joe. Thank you very much.
And as I said, we are going to switch now to join David Williams of the Taxpayer Protection Alliance, where we're going to get into some of the things. And he's said, as Steve mentioned, there are things in the budget in this deal that are good. I mean, the clawing back of some of the monies for the there it is. There it goes. Getting David into the studio here, but clawing back all this unspent COVID money, and we have cities all across our listening area and the nation with millions and millions of dollars of unspent COVID-19 money. And that's just one of the many things that, thank God, they're trying to claw some of this back. I wish they had tried this a year and a half ago, because we could have clawed back a whole bunch more. David Williams from the Taxpayer Protection Alliance, thank you so much for taking some time out with us, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I mean, we saw this debt ceiling deal. We see spending is going to increase, right? They talk about these spending cuts, and it makes me laugh when I hear about spending
Right.
cuts. And yet we're going to have to increase the debt ceiling in 2 years. Well, if there were real spending cuts, we wouldn't have to do that, would we?
That seems like the first thing I hear, but then I hear, there's a freeze on spending increases, but it's not really, because it's tied to GDP, isn't it, David?
Yeah, it is. And here's the logic is that instead of growing, let's say at 4 or 5%, spending is going to grow at 1%. That's still growth, right? So it's like
Yeah.
me going to my doctor and saying, hey, doc, next year I'm going to gain 100 pounds. And then next year I only gain 50 pounds. My doctor's not to give me a certificate and say, hey, you lost 50 pounds. No, I still gained those 50 pounds. I mean, but that's Washington logic is you can increase spending and still call it a spending cut.
Now, I was reading your analysis of this, and you did say there were some things and you mentioned the clawing back of the unspent COVID money, which we printed on the full faith and credit of Hunter's laptop. It seems like, David. What are I want to start here, because everyone says, "Oh, you're always such a nattering nabob of negativism, Joe." So, how about we start with some of the things that are good that Kevin McCarthy managed to get in the debt ceiling deal, because it sure doesn't sound like I want him playing poker for me.
No, not at all. And listen, default on the debt would be catastrophic to the economy, right? And I just don't like the process that has gotten us here, because this happened in January. We knew that this was going to happen in June, back in January. But look at the IRS. For the first time, we are going to claw back some of the money. Now, granted, they just spent $80 billion more, and we have $1.4 billion that they're taking away from that. So again, we're trying to look at these small victories and think that, at least something is happening. So that's a positive step. And the COVID money, boy, trillions of dollars, and they were able to claw back $28 billion. Now, again, there's so much more to do on this. But listen, I don't think if Kevin McCarthy, if he wasn't speaker, if the Republicans weren't controlling the House, we would have none of this.
Oh
This would
gosh,
be
no.
it would be more of a blank check. So again, just to maintain my sanity, I'm trying to find a little bit of positive from what's happened in the last 72 hours.
Is the big winner in this, David, Janet Yellen? Because I was looking forward so much to January 2nd and holding her to account for her failures to continue to pay our obligations with almost $5 trillion worth of tax collections coming into the federal government. So I wanted to hold her to account for that, to make her almost, jump ahead of Alejandro Mayorkas as the Biden official most likely to be impeached by the end of the year. But now she dodges that responsibility, because now she gets to again go ahead and pretend that, a debt limit increase was the only way to keep us solvent.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, she is the big winner here, and I'm concerned is what the Fed has done, that the Treasury Department has done the past couple of years has been really bad for this economy. I mean, look at inflation. They think that 6 or 5% inflation is good news. No, it's absolutely not good news.
No.
it's it's still a huge burden on consumers and taxpayers. And we see a recession. A recession is going to happen this year. Economists have been saying that later this year. And listen, we may be in a recession because we have economic numbers all over the place. Some months it's good, some months it's bad. We have really anemic GDP growth
Hmm.
from quarter to quarter. So, this is a victory that Janet Yellen, she's going to take some victory laps here. And really, quite frankly, no one should. When you have a $31 trillion debt and you're going to see a $35 trillion debt in 2 years after, for the next debt ceiling debate, no victory is to be made here. There's again a little bit of good news, but not victory for sure.
So I'm listening to Ilhan Omar and some of the Green New Deal folks talking about, I'm not going to vote for this. And there's the Chip Roy, Bob Good, crowd that are going to not vote for this as well. Does this even pass on Wednesday?
I think it does because you're going to have a handful of Republicans and a handful of Democrats not voting for it, but then you'll have a lot of moderate Democrats voting for it. So I think that's going to more than make up for the defections in the Republican Party. And quite frankly, I have a ton of respect for the Republicans that are voting against it because they are voting their conscience. They are voting what they think is the right way to do this. And again, I hope this puts pressure on McCarthy, on all the committee chairmen, that when they go into the appropriations process, into the spending bills, is that they remember this and that they move forward with real spending cuts and not just shuffling things around. I mean, we see this all the time, is that they say, well, we're going to take money from pot A and put it to pot
Yeah.
B. So we're saying, no, you're not saving. You're just moving. And what Americans want to see and what taxpayers want to see is they want to see a deficit go down. They want to see it eliminated. They want to see the debt, managed, not managed, but even getting rid of and actually decreased over the years. But again, we are going to see the debt increase by $4 trillion over the next 2 years. And here's something to keep in mind. The next debt ceiling is going to be January of 2025. What happens before January? Christmas, the holidays. It is going to be a mess. And I don't want to get too far ahead, but December of 2024 is going to be awful because we've seen this time and time again with spending bills, is that December is the cruelest month, not April, like T.S. Eliot said.
Oh, yeah.
December is the cruelest month for taxpayers.
Well, and because they will be the hostage in the basement of this game, along with, and I can't imagine that this isn't going to be a presidential election football. Who wants what for the debt ceiling? Who's going to be the default president? Because January of 2025 is also going to be a new administration in there. Do they try to do this before the 20th of January, 2025?
Great question. And the two things that I was really concerned about, the first was that there's no dollar amount on this debt ceiling increase. So that means they can go against the spending caps. They can change their mind on a lot of the stuff and spend money like crazy. I mean, we know they're going to spend money like crazy. So that was a concern, that there's no dollar amount. It's a time frame. And that's relatively new because I've been doing this for a very long time. And I remember when they would increase the debt ceiling by dollar amount, which
Right.
puts more pressure on them. And I said that if they get this past the election, that's a huge win for President Biden because that's what he wanted. Remember, Speaker McCarthy wanted this for the spring of 2024, and the president wanted it past the election. I think every member of Congress should go on record as often as possible when it comes to spending, when it comes to these issues. And if this creates more chaos, I don't care because I want members of Congress to be talking about the debt ceiling next year, right before an election. But that's not going to happen now. This is extended until 2025, and I would not, be surprised if it's after the inauguration of the next president, whomever that is.
Well, unless the election goes the way against the way they wanted to, and then they'll try to get it done on the 19th of
Yes.
January. David Williams, Taxpayer Protection Alliance, is on with us on the Afternoon Constitutional. So, David, I know that one of the concessions that the Gang of 12 managed to get from Kevin McCarthy was the return to normal order, which means any member of the House can call for an election on the Speaker. ostensibly what Parliament would call a vote of no confidence. Do you foresee that happening before we get to a vote on this debt ceiling deal from the people in D.C.? What are they telling you?
So it's really interesting you bring that up because we've been having internal discussions at the Taxpayers Protection Alliance on that very subject. I don't think it's going to happen before the vote, but I think there's a potential this is going to happen after the vote in June or July because I think there are going to be a lot of frustrated fiscal conservatives in the House that are going to look at this as a betrayal because you look at the budget caps for 2 years. McCarthy passed a bill that was 6 years. And listen, what McCarthy passed was good. I'm not going to say it was great. It was good, and that's even watered down now. So I think that's the story that's yet to be told is what
Mhm.
happens to Kevin McCarthy after this vote and whether his tenure as speaker is short-lived. And I think there's a decent possibility that we could see that drama unfold in the next month or two.
Well, and I've warned some of my listeners and folks in email. I said, beware, Speaker Hakeem Jeffries, because it can happen with a House majority of Republicans that a Democrat winds up Speaker of the House, doesn't it, David?
It does. And of course, that's a huge fear is that the chaos with the Republicans makes Hakeem Jeffries a speaker. But listen, I think there are a lot of good Republicans that could step in. Steve Scalise from Louisiana,
Hmm.
really solid guy, right? I mean, he's never involved in any controversies and he's a good fiscal conservative and he's a social conservative, which a lot of people like. So, I mean, there are good people in the House that could step in. And of course, what that means is that yeah, the mainstream media would just eat that up for lunch, right? Because whenever the Democrats are in turmoil, they don't pay attention to it, right?
Yeah,
it's a,
yeah,
it's a
that's democracy when the Democrats are in turmoil. That's the democratic process when Republicans are in turmoil. See, they're the gang that can't shoot straight.
Yes,
That's it.
exactly.
So when we watch all this playing out, the key, and we're going to go back, Taxpayer Protection Alliance. Each one of these dollars debases the ones that are currently out there. Each one of them dilutes the buying power of the dollars in my retirement account, in my IRA, in my 401k. The retirees, and we were the ones who were going to throw grandma from the train. We were the ones who were putting the full faith and credit of the Social Security Administration at risk when these are the folks who are going to do more damage to people's retirements than anyone I can recall in history, David.
Right, and you mentioned the devaluing of the dollar. I mean, look what's happened with all this government spending, the COVID spending. We're talking about trillions of dollars.
Hmm.
There's a reason why we have inflation. It's because of the government spending. Listen, you have the supply chain issues. Yeah, but that wasn't the big cause of it. It's just so much money was put into the economy. And
Hmm.
I look at this deal and I think about the missed opportunities. There are so many missed opportunities. And Rand Paul puts out this report, his Festivus report, every December. $1.7 billion dollars of unused building space that if they leased it out, if they sold these buildings, that's 1.7 billion immediately. We don't hear any discussion about the waste,
Right.
fraud, and abuse in the budget. And I really wanted more talk about that. I wanted more talk about going through and getting rid of the wasteful programs. And there's a lot of low hanging fruit here. Improper payments. This blows my mind. $250 billion dollars money is going to people that should not be getting it. I mean, this is not going to take away government services from people who don't need those government services.
How much
Improper
again?
payment.
How much?
$250 billion dollars a year in improper payments.
Oh my God, that's insane. And these and the thing that scares me the most, David, about this is that this also continues to put us into a track of being more and more dependent on government. More and more people are going to have to get certain amounts of money from the government. More and more agencies, more and more nonprofits are going to start getting government money. More police agencies and teachers unions and school divisions. And so I think as the years progress, doesn't this make it harder to doesn't this make it harder to even have a reasonable discussion about the debt ceiling ever again?
It does, and you hit the nail on the head with this, is that the bureaucracy gets bigger, and it's by design. Bureaucracies never shrink. They always get bigger, and it's by design because they want people to become dependent upon government. And something as silly as golf carts,
Hmm.
that the Department of Transportation mandates the kind of windshield that a golf cart has to have. But this is part of the bureaucratic creep, right? I guess that's a noun and a verb. But the bureaucratic creep that we see in government is that they come up with these ridiculous regulations. They want to get rid of gas stoves, light bulbs, dishwashers, and we're just putting an op-ed together on the house of the future. If the government had control,
Oh
the
my
house of the
gosh.
future is pretty awful.
Oh my, and again, Mike Pence was the guy who wanted to bring on the Handmaid's Tale. We're going to bring on the Flintstones with this.
Exactly. And it's really a shame because we have some of the best technology available to us, and the government doesn't understand that. And again, this is about spending. This is about when a bureaucracy grows, that's more spending, and it never goes away. And our biggest concern is that, over the next 2 years, while some of the Republicans are going to be doing their happy dance on this debt ceiling deal, is like, well, let's just keep it tempered here. Let's just not get too excited because let's have this discussion in 2 years when we see what really happened. And again, spending increases; it doesn't decrease. No matter what anyone says
Yeah.
to you, spending is increasing.
Well, and as you said, and very clearly, I mean, how can it be debatable? They need $4.4 trillion more as this goes on. When you talk about recession, are we talking about 2007, 2008, or are we talking 1977 and 1978, David, or somewhere in the middle?
I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle.
Oh boy.
And my concern is that we've already established enhanced unemployment benefits. We've already established a lot of these programs that very quickly they can come back with, that we could be talking about stimulus checks. And the last time we saw these checks the IRS put out, there was $1 billion in checks that went to dead people. Now, when asked, the
Hmm.
IRS was asked by Congress, why did you send money to dead people? An IRS spokesman said, no one told us we shouldn't. Like they had to be told not to send this money to dead people. This is the logic that occurs. So I'm concerned that what's already been in place during COVID, and I've talked about this in the past, is that we've established that now we're going to spend trillions of dollars when there's a down economic time. And obviously, COVID was an extreme example, but I can totally see new programs coming out and more spending. And going back to this debt ceiling deal, one of the biggest disappointments are the green energy tax credits,
Hmm.
because this is something that people don't realize is they put a price tag on this last year of about $400 billion. Well, we looked at it, and our analysis was that this could actually cost more than $1 trillion, these energy tax credits. And there was an opportunity to get rid of those during this debt ceiling debate, and the Republicans blinked,
Well,
and we're not seeing it.
is that cost taking into effect the economic impact on people who are minimum wage or paycheck to paycheck? Never mind the middle class, whatever remains of the middle class, because it certainly seems like, despite the president's rhetoric about I'm not going to go after anyone making less than $400,000 a year, whoever they may be. It's going to, whether I have to change my gas stove, I have to change my refrigerator, I have to change all the windows in my house, I have to change the roof in my house. These are all taxes that I'm going to have to be on the arm for anyway. And the president can call it an investment because I have to pay the federal government back eventually over time for it. But it's still costing me money right now.
Well, that's right. And let's look at gas stoves. If you are outlawing one kind of stove, well, guess what? The other kind of stove is going to be more expensive. I
Yeah.
mean, competition is what drives prices down. And when there's less competition, you're going to have higher prices. And, electric vehicles, you have some states, the state of Maryland, who has said that by 2035, we will not be selling any gas powered vehicles. Man, if that's not going to drive up the price of electric vehicles that are already high, and
Hmm.
you have, impoverished cities like Baltimore, where people are making $40,000 a year. They can't buy a $60,000 car.
No,
And
well,
they
well, yeah, David, I think about the World Economic Forum slogan, the big poster they had 2 or 3 years ago. It's 2030. I own nothing. I have no privacy, and I've never been happier. Is that their mindset? Is you don't need to own a car? Because I see it. I see it in British cities where you have to have travel documents to leave your neighborhood. We're watching cities in America with congestion taxes on it. At some point, getting around, you're going to, get the right to transportation. But what does that look like? Is it municipal Uber or whatever? They don't want you owning a house. They don't want you owning a car. They don't want you owning a business, it seems.
Yeah, that's right. And you mentioned those three things about the World Economic Forum. Well, two out of three are correct. It's the third one
Yeah.
that's wrong, is that no one is happy because they want privacy. We want to own things. And when it comes to vehicles, and I think you're right, going towards a future of really just outlawing cars and
Yeah.
making it very difficult. But we're a country of cars. Listen, I own a Jeep Wrangler, man. I take the doors off, I put the top down, and pry that from my cold
You
dead
look
hand.
like that kind of guy. You know what? A button down Oxford shirt during the week, and then the tie dye T-shirt comes on the weekend. I got
You
you
got
now,
it.
David.
Yeah.
So
So go ahead.
so where do we then where do we turn for the sanity? I mean, if the best we can hope for is it's either unga bunga or death by unga bunga, and don't call in if you know what the joke is. But if the best we've got is, well, you could die right now or you could bleed out over the next few years. What is our hope? What should we be looking for as first, Virginia has its entire General Assembly. I've been telling Governor Youngkin every time I get a chance to make our rainy day fund gold. Don't make our rainy day fund cash anymore. Take that $2 billion rainy day fund and buy gold with it. But beyond that, I mean, the Virginia General Assembly, in its own fiscal responsibility, and then 2024, like I said, if this debt thing is going to come up in January of 2025, what should we be asking the people who are running for these offices, not just president, but also all the congressional offices?
And it's really not asking, it's demanding, because we've seen that already the past 3 or 4 days where people are outraged over this deal. And I want to translate that into elections. And I want to make sure that the right people are in office, that we have fiscal conservatives. And it has started with the House. The next thing is the Senate. And there's a real possibility in 2024 the Republicans take over the Senate. I mean, that's a whole different creature than the House, because you have the filibuster, you have the 60 vote
Hmm.
rule. A lot can happen there, but there needs to be a change. And I don't know if you noticed this, but Chuck Schumer said nothing about the debt negotiations. I mean, here's a guy that runs the Senate,
Yeah.
and he had very little to say about this.
Yeah.
So
And he has a
we
lot to say about everything. I mean, I can't
yes.
shut the guy up. And I grew up in New York City, and I've seen Chuck Schumer since he was in the state legislature, and he never shuts up. That is interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
So I think it's really, the elections and holding them accountable. And listen, holding Kevin McCarthy accountable. And, the next 2 years, there needs to be real progress by Republicans, like I mentioned earlier, during the spending process, and
Hmm.
making sure that more of the projects are defunded, that the IRS, we have an IRS that wants to prepare your taxes for you. They want to say, trust us. We'll take all of your financial information and we'll figure out the refund for you. Can you imagine how messy that's going to be from
What
a
could go wrong?
privacy standpoint? But you really think the IRS is going to sit there and go, let's see, Dave Williams, I'm going to try to get him a really big refund? Absolutely not. I mean,
Yeah.
the IRS is not
Who,
there. The IRS is not there to help.
Well, and that goes back to Harvey Silverglate's book, Three Felonies a Day, where he talks about how the old Stalin, show me the man, I'll show you the crime, is existing in America, and most of it is IRS code. Is, oh well, you wrote this in your 2022 return, but in 2023 you checked this box, which countermands that. So were you lying to the IRS now, or were you lying to the IRS then? Either one is a felony.
Yeah, what's the joke? When did you stop lying to the IRS?
Yeah, exactly. When did the IRS start? The 16th Amendment? David Williams, Taxpayer Protection Alliance, I thank you so much for your time on this and your look into this, and the couple of things. So, it's bad, but it's not as bad as it, I guess. That's bad.
Well, it's bad, but again, let's put their feet to the fire. And if they say that there's going to be budget caps, if they say that they're going to rescind the COVID money and they're going to take away money from the IRS, we have to make sure that they do it. And just one last thing is I'm concerned is what they say are gentlemen's agreements in this deal is that, oh, we're going to take more away from the IRS. Well, let's make sure that they do, and don't let them back down and back away from some of these promises.
Well, thank you so much, sir. Again, Taxpayer Protection, it's protecttaxpayer.org is the website.
Protectingtaxpayers.org.
Protecting,
And
yeah.
please call your member of Congress. When you're upset, and please call your member of Congress. Your voice has to be heard.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate you for sharing your voice with ours today, and you have a wonderful day, and enjoy the, hopefully the next couple of days are Jeep Wrangler top-down weather.
Amen. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on today's edition of the Afternoon Constitution. More of this tomorrow at 3. We've got lots of cool stuff cooking for you as the week wears on. Until tomorrow, for all of us here, my name is Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.